We're going to manage equality. That's what we're going to do. Today's progressivism is about managing equality less than it is about managing efficiency. Technocracy kind of fits that element more.
And so we run into this danger. If the system doesn't get reset, then what happens? What does it look like? And the only example I've come back to it over and over again. I've mentioned it in several things I've talked about. The only example I can see in history is when the Roman Republic failed to reset at their last fourth turning crisis. Now, there was something that you had mentioned when we were talking about, because we were talking about Marxism and the Marxist revolution. And I wanted to ask you about something, about you had mentioned how the Fabian socialists in England, they had they're Marxists, but they didn't subscribe to the revolutionary belief system. But they instead wanted to do a slow adoption of Marxist principles.
Yeah.
Socialism.
So for the benefit of anybody listening to this, you're referencing a conversation you and I had. I think it was last week, a little bit around Fabianism versus revolutionary Trotskyism or other forms of the Soviet revolutionary style. Yeah. So fascinating. It is fascinating because in a sense, where do we land our today's progressive left political structures? Like how do we frame them? The Fabians are a British progressive socialist movement that formed already in the before World War One. The 1880s, 1890s is when you see Fabianism, especially in the 1890s and 1910s, and that era really coming into play. The approach that the British Fabians took was more of if you want to think about the hare and the tortoise. Remember the famous story of the hare and the tortoise. The hare, the rabbit runs fast. There's a race between the two. The rabbit runs fast, but then the rabbit gets sidetracked. The rabbit takes a break. The rabbit does all kinds of other things. Hey, he's got time, but because he's got speed on his side. That's the revolutionary approach. That's like, let's go in and like whomp them all, and we'll force the revolution, and we'll force the evolution of humanity. Whereas the Fabian approach was the tortoise approach, which was incremental, slow, steady, just constant prodding and plodding towards the goal. Not necessarily revolutionary. It's not taking it by violence. It's taking it from the perspective of culture, taking it from the perspective of education, taking it at the level of the mind and the heart without necessarily taking up arms or muscle or coercion first. It was a different approach, whereas the revolutionary, the permanent revolution is always, the vanguard. We need to have the constant pressure of coercion, the constant pressure of the violent act to bring about the utopia. And the Fabian approach was utopia will come, but it's a long-term project. It's a steady movement towards that end. But the approach is not violent revolution. It is instead the revolution of the mind, the revolution of the heart, the revolution of a culture, the revolution of a social system. And so, when you take a look at the Fabians, the Fabian and the UK Labour Party are intertwined. Labour Party platform, the Labour Party movement is a product, emerges from the Fabian Society, which is, it wasn't, the Fabian Society wasn't just simply a general broad movement. It wasn't that. It was a focused group of individuals, an organized element, pardon me, an organization promoting and pushing this from a political, social, economic perspective first. So the Labour Party is an extension of the Fabians. What's interesting in the Fabians is you have a spiritual dimension that comes into play, primarily through the work of Annie Besant, who was a leader in the Theosophical Society and brought theosophical ideas into the way of Fabian thinking.
Could you explain briefly what exactly are theosophical ideas?
Yeah, sure. So theosophy was a movement that really gained traction in the 1870s, 1880s with a lady by the name of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. If you take a look at pictures of her, she always has a dour, kind of sour look to her. But I mean, back then, almost everybody who took a picture of had a very static composure, but she has especially a static, kind of like a dour composure. She brought together Eastern ideas, Eastern philosophies with Western esoteric, Western occult ideas, married them, brought them together, synthesized them within the concept that there is no religion higher than truth. And truth is this amalgamation of these synthetic, or a synthesis of these ideas. Eastern religion, Western occultism, pulling out of Kabbalism, a lot of Jewish mysticism from the Renaissance time period. That's when that really kind of emerges. Pulling Rosicrucian ideas, pulling ideas out of esoteric Freemasonry, pulling ideas from Hinduism specifically and Buddhism, and then having her own revelations, her own belief structures implanted within it. And it was really an exciting movement for the social elite, especially of America and Europe. It also ended up landing strongly in India.
Okay.
And if you were, the social elite in England, let's say in the late 1800s, you would likely end up rubbing shoulders somewhere down the road with theosophy. The 1893 Parliament of World Religions, theosophy was given kind of a special platform. They were given actually a room for their first couple of workshops or lectures on theosophy. But from what I understand in reading the literature, the room that they were given was immediately overcrowded. They had to move the theosophical panel to a different room, and that immediately was massively filled up, and they had to move it to another one, and by that point it was like the crowds are enormous, because for the first time in modernity, in a significant way, theosophy was offering to the West a re-enchanted mystical vision. It wasn't the same as, let's say, Mormonism coming out of the same time period, modernity, the 1860s, 70s, 1880s, that time period. There's so many things that popped up out of that time period, so many religious movements. But this was a little bit different in that it offered a very mystical approach, and it wedded itself with the social elite of the day in a major way. And so, because of its oversized influence, it played an important role, especially through the work of Aimé Besant, in kind of implanting in the mind of the Fabians theosophical concepts and ideas. The idea of evolution, the evolution of man, the evolution of the race. Wow, there's so much. We need to do an entire program at some point. Okay. On theosophy, because it is so crucial. Really, the New Age movement of the last 50 years has been a combination of theosophy, direct influences from Eastern mysticism, primarily Hinduism, with the Hindu gurus coming to the West in the 1960s and 70s, and the amalgamation of the human potential movement of that same time period, and psychedelics coming in, those components merging to give us the New Age movement.
Yes. Okay.
Yep. So that's kind of that background. But yeah, the Fabians gave us the Labor Party, and so it was a different type of revolution, more of a slow burn than a fast, climactic, coercive revolution. It's not the Russian Revolution of 1917. It wasn't it's not a bloody revolution. It's a revolution in mind.
So would you say, because one of the things that I think we're talking about is bringing this into the current crisis that we're in.
Right.
We're in this fourth turning crisis where all the institutions, need to get reset and overturned. Is the Fabian idea, I mean, let's just call it in the United States. Okay, Fabian is, kind of mostly a British thing, but let's say those same ideas are very integrated into American political thought, especially on the left. So let's call it the Fabian Plus. Okay,
like that.
Right.
I like that.
Okay, so the Fabian Plus ideas, would you say that set of ideas are an extension of modernity, or are they a fork off of modernity moving in a new direction?
That's a great question, George. I think it was born out of modernity, but the pathway. Okay, well, that's a really good question, because progressivism, the left progressive collective idea, is an idea that emerges from the heart of modernity, which is we can plan and manage and engineer our way forward.
Yes.
That really is essence of it. It's about management. We're going to manage the effective, efficient. We're going to manage equality. That's what we're going to do. Today's progressivism is about managing equality less than it is about managing efficiency. Technocracy kind of fits that element more. So it really is an outgrowth of modernity. At the same time, it ends up adopting its own spirit, its own zeitgeist, its own pathway forward that almost becomes mystical, or certainly its own mythology, its own narrative of identity, of the causes, certain causes. So I take a look at the environmental movement because that has been primarily a feature that has been front and center from leftist political groups. Though, I mean, now the narrative is so baked into every facet of government and bureaucracy. It doesn't matter if it's left or right that gets into power. It's there because it's already literally baked into the political culture. But when you take examine the environmental movement, where environmental policies come out of, and even the visions and aspirations of the modern environmental movement and its causes at the United Nations level, you can't help but run into the sense of re-enchantment. Mm-hmm. You can't help but run into the sense of, okay, here's the movement towards our purpose and meaning. And what is our purpose and meaning? Our purpose and meaning is to work for the salvation of Gaia, Mother Earth, the environment, either through climate change policies or biodiversity policies. That's what it is. And already in the 1970s, you see this thinking starting to converge with, first of all, I think probably more on the left, but it certainly was there right across the board. Even the conservative side was saying, hey, we have this environmental crisis. We need to do something about it. There's always that sense. It's always, we need to do something. And it's usually predicated on the general good or the common good or the common betterment. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? But I take a look today at today's political movements, mm-hmm. and while you could say it's an extension of modernity, because it is, especially on the progressive side, there's that extension of modernity of engineering, management. We're going to manage equality. We're going to bring this forward. Here's the policies, here's the programs, and in our case right now, here's the emotion that's attached to it. Strong emotion pushing the culture. So, I mean, we now fear that if all of a sudden we come against, let's say, this is June, we come against, let's say, the Pride movement, that there's going to be social pushback. And you can even have criminal pushback. In my country, Canada, if you're a pastor, you say certain things, you make certain statements, and all of a sudden you might find yourself having to face a human rights tribunal. So there's emotion that's attached to it. Strong, strong emotion. That's kind of pulling the zeitgeist along.
Wow.
And you can't divorce any of it from each other. It's all part and parcel.
Well, and that's where because when I look at it, we're thinking about, as we tie this all together, we're seeing this huge challenge that Special Operations Forces see with China and Russia, and the threat externally that Western societies have. And you see the base of where Western societies have been, and following the Fabian Plus idea, believing that we're going to this great and glorious future, and there's something and that has embedded itself within the political discussion, and that in and of itself, there's elements of that in and of itself that are fundamentally self-destructive. And so it weakens the entire civilization from the encroachments of Russian and Chinese aggression, or Islamic expansion, because it's part of the Fabian Plus idea. In order to continue to push the reenchantment ideas, there has to be an element of self-loathing on our own past, and a collective guilt. We see that at Burning Man, the way they exalt Native American shamans and put them on a pedestal as if they can do no wrong at all, just because they're Native American and they've maintained their shamanic practices. Native American Christians aren't allowed on that pedestal. But
Right. The shamans are.
But the shamans are. And so
Right.
it all comes to, as we go through the type of crisis that we're facing in this fourth turning, is the difference between what we're facing in this fourth turning versus what we faced in the last 4 or 5 fourth turnings, is that it looks like that which is necessary to pull out of the fourth turning, which is a breakdown of the institutional ideas and power structures that have put us in this position. That breakdown, they're so deeply embedded because of Fabian Plus, because of re-enchantment, and because of all these different things, that they're not going to get overturned.
Right.
That's the big concern I have, is that if they don't get overturned, the system doesn't reset. Okay? And the crisis period doesn't get resolved. That's the concern that I have. And so even though you have someone like Donald Trump who's a disruptor, and he is trying to disrupt the system, whether you agree with him or not, the disruption is actually a necessary component of bringing the system, shifting the system over, getting it to turn over so it can be healed. So the only thing that could bring, seems like, one of the guys, fellow that I was traveling with at both the events that I was at, we kind of looked at each other and we said, the only thing that's actually going to reset everything is if there actually was an alien species that actually did come down and actually were hostile to us and to the whole world. The Ronald Reagan.
That scenario.
The Ronald Reagan statement at the UN, that because besides that, there's not enough drive. There's too much complacency, believing that everything's gonna be fine. This Chinese malware, they're never gonna actually do that. We can, as long as we just print the money, and people are going to, this proliferation of the betting economy and the investing economy, so that anyone that has a computer and is a little bit smart can open up a trading account and make bazillions of dollars. They don't have to go and become the engineer or the scientist or do those things that are necessary for our whole society to get reset. And it's all and so we run into this danger. If the system doesn't get reset, then what happens? What is it? What does it look like? And the only example I've come back to it over and over again. I've mentioned it in several things that I've talked about. The only example I can see in history is when the Roman Republic failed to reset at their last fourth turning crisis. When the Gracchi brothers tried to implement reforms, land reforms, and they failed because the power systems were so entrenched, it caused the entire Roman Republic, which is on the in the Italian peninsula, and they had just 80 years before that, they had defeated Carthage in the Second Punic War. That was their last existential threat. So then they devolved into a civil conflict that 100 years of civil conflict. When they finally emerged from that, with Augustus or Octavian becoming Augustus Caesar, becoming the first Roman emperor, the Roman Republic didn't exist anymore, and there was no one left alive that knew what that functioning republic had looked like when they operated. And that's the concern that I have, is if we don't reset, if we get a major blue wave in these midterm elections, and I'm not trying to advocate for one party or another, because we're not a political thing, but it seems like if we got a major blue wave in the midterm elections, so that the power structure shifted back to the base of the Fabian Plus initiatives, the system won't get reset.
Yeah. So then you have a more internal breakdown, more internal crises, more internal disruption. You don't even necessarily need an outside actor to step in. It may happen, but you may not need that. The argument could even be made that some of those outside actors, at the very least from an ideological position, if not through direct action, have helped precipitate the social disruption that's happened across the Western country, including yours and mine. I certainly made the argument for Canada that way. That splinters us internally to the point where we can't find a resolution for the crisis.
In fact, if we go to a civil conflict, like a civil war type scenario where you have two sides, this domestic or civil violence gets beyond the level where police can control it. That is actually highly likely to bring in outside influence. In fact, it didn't happen as in the American Civil War, but historically, civil wars almost always invite outside influence to help solve the war. People invite, and so and you can see where that would go. Like the political left would go to the more extremes of the political left. They would invite the Chinese to come in, and and the Chinese would have their agenda on coming.
Sure,
we'll help you if you do this, this, and this.
Yeah, and it doesn't even mean direct physical action. It could be anything from economic assistance to intelligence assistance to the list goes on. No kidding, hey. Yeah, we've entered a point in our history where we are seeing. We see where this is going. We see that there's already an internal rot within our own structure. It's ground us down hard. There's a book that came out in the 1980s called Hage's Law, written by an attorney. I can't remember his first name. His last name is Haga. It's a great book, by the way. If you can find a copy of it, get it. Probably pick it up for only a couple of bucks on Amazon. Full of fun little cartoons as he's trying to demonstrate what he called Hage's Law. And Hage's Law being this, that as a culture and a nation increases its regulatory structure, increases management, increases trying to mitigate risk by adding in more and more layers of complexity, more regulations are necessary because now more risk is unlocked and unveiled. Then more regulations are imposed, and you have a cycle that continues until the effectiveness of the institutions are wiped out. They're gone.
Yeah.
All it is just chasing. You're not chasing the purpose of the institution, all you're doing is, as an institution, chasing the purpose of the regulations. And you've lost your meaning. You've lost your point. And the people have lost their faith.
That's right. Yeah. Wow. So, what a wonderful note to end on.
But it's maybe it's an important note to end on, because I think as Christians it forces us to realize the fragile state of man's attempt to manage man.
And that's really true. And another thing, when you bring it up, of course, the ministry we have is we want to bring the attention of this to Christians.
Right.
And one of the things that I would also say, another lesson to learn is, this is why it's important for us as Christians to be out there and engaging, to not hide in our basements, waiting for Jesus to return, cowering in fear because we're afraid that they're trying to implement the system of the Antichrist or the beast. They might very well be doing that. We have to know that we have this incredible privilege of being able to speak life and speak truth to the people around us, and to be salt and light. Jesus said we are the salt, and the salt of the earth and the light of the world. We've got to encourage all our young people to get out there and to get involved and to be participating.
Right, and to see it for what it is. Again, I think especially in the Christian context, we want to simplify things to a very clear, almost a polemic black and white. And the world, as we have just discussed and as you've articulated, is more complex. It's more messy. It's more nuanced. Are we able to speak truth into a complex, nuanced culture, recognizing the dangers, recognizing the scenarios as they may play out or they may not play out, but being able to recognize those pattern shifts, and then being able to, right where you are, being able to speak truth into those patterns as it lands in your family, in your church, in your community, because it does.
That's right.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, thank you. I thought it was a really good discussion. And
we could go on for a long time with this stuff, but this is a good stopping point.
Good stopping point. So we'll say goodbye to you all, our listeners and subscribers. Thank you for paying attention, and of course, please email us if you have any questions, or even if you have any topics that you would like for us to discuss. We'd be glad to do that, and pray everyone, Lord's blessing on all of you. Okay, thank you.